and welcome to the Moving Forward Talk Show. I'm your host, Jennifer Collins, along with my friends Christy and Emily. As always on our talk show, today we're going to demonstrate that life goes on and healing happens if you just keep moving forward. The area we want to address this week is that of finances, and for support, we've turned to someone who's an expert in the field, as well as a fellow exitee from the high demand groups, Stephanie Niblock. Welcome, Stephanie.
Thank you for having me.
You're so welcome. And why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about your podcast so that we get all the details straight on that.
Yeah, so I have a podcast and a book. It's Be Your Money Hero. I also do course creation. And one of the things that I'm just so passionate about is telling people what happened and what I learned the hard way, that our traumas and our experiences actually shape the way we handle money and the relationship we have with it. So that's kind of what I talk about on the podcast, various different aspects of that, from, whether it's physical abuse, emotional abuse, or just adverse experiences that we've had throughout our lifetimes and how that can actually creep into the decisions we make with money. And we don't even realize it.
If you would like to tell us a little bit about your journey out of the high control group, that might help us get kind of a window into who Stephanie is.
Yeah. So I am the oldest of my family. My dad had grown up in a high control group, and my mother was the daughter of a Foursquare pastor, which was more traditional church, I would imagine, more traditional or normal. And she got pregnant with me. And so because of that, she ended up marrying my dad. And throughout the course, I ended up being the oldest of 12. I was homeschooled my entire educational career. And it was when I was probably about 16, when my dad started to just get a little more controlling. My parents were actually in a network marketing group, which was kind of like the gateway into other segments of high control groups. And so we ended up being involved in the Branham Church, but also the Institute of Basic Life Principles, and then a Vision Forum as well. And so it was kind of a triad of those three organizations. And I reached the point when I was 19 years old that I couldn't do it anymore. I felt like my soul was just dying on the inside. I could not function. I couldn't sleep. Like I wasn't eating. And so I ended up deciding to leave at that point. So when I decided to leave, I made sure I had my Social Security card, and I did have a passport. All of the money is controlled by somebody else, right? So my dad was on all of those accounts. So I pulled out a cashier's check. So I'd have my cash that I had earned because I'd been working professionally since I was 13, and I had some money saved up. So I made sure I pulled all of that out into a form that he couldn't get to, and snuck out in the middle of the night. I had a friend who came and got me, and driving down I-25, I never felt more liberated. And that was kind of the beginning of the aftermath.
Wow, I think you have the most dramatic exit story we've heard. I would like to give first Christy and then Emily an opportunity to respond to your story.
Yes, Stephanie, I have known about you for far longer than I have known you, since your family is very well known in an area where I lived for a while. And so I got to know them, and I knew they had an older daughter that wasn't discussed very much. And I figured out later on it was because you had left the high control group, and they preferred to stay quiet about that. So when I had left, me and my husband were trying to make sense of what we had just done, leaving the high control group. And I said, I'd really like to talk to Stephanie, and I'd really like to meet her, just so I had some sense of other people do this and they leave high control groups, and like, where do they end up and how did they land and are they okay? So that was really healing getting to meet you then. And I'm so glad to have you on the podcast now to get to know you a little bit better, a little bit further along in life, and to hear about your professional pursuits and achievements. So thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. I'm intrigued to learn more about your story and hear how your insights can help those that are maybe thinking about leaving or have left and are struggling. I know it's kind of a passion of mine. I think women end up sticking around longer because they fear the money thing. How am I going to provide for myself? My husband has all the money. He has the job. I don't know what to do. Even women or young girls who don't have an education, because education is of the devil. So what do you do for a job? You don't know how to have that first job. So I was intrigued. You said you were working since you were 13. So what were you doing as a 13-year-old to start gathering money in your bank account to be able to pull out at a cashier's check?
Well, I consider myself to be very fortunate because my dad was an entrepreneur and he owned several businesses. And in the sector that we were in, you were only allowed to work for your dad or for your husband eventually. So since I was lucky enough to have a father that owned his own businesses and he did like include me on some of the things that, as far as how to handle money and business decisions, like he did teach us as children, his children, those things, so that we could support him in the business, because that's a tax write-off and it still went into the home, right? So it netted out. That's so since I had been working since I was 13 years old, I initially started working in the summers doing admin type stuff, just answering the phone and paperwork and things like that. But he was a difficult person to work for, believe it or not. And when I was 16, they ended up pulling me out of homeschool because everybody kind of quit at once, and they brought me in to retrain everybody. So through the course of working there, I had gotten experience answering phones, customer service, order processing, and then some accounting and HR type of experience as well. So that was, I know I consider myself lucky in that regard because I know not everybody had that tools and resource and information. But that's also part of why I feel so strongly that it's partially like it's part of my responsibility to help other people who maybe don't have that information and help them along that way.
Interesting. Very interesting. Yeah, I know a 18-year-old right now that is struggling to get their first job and write, resume writing. All these things that you don't really realize are all encompassing in getting that first job, and with the job market, for whatever reason, there's a lot of jobs, but yet it's really hard to get a job these days. And I was just talking to a gal, I don't remember. Oh, that was at Costco. I went in there and had asked someone for help, young kid. Nope, that's not my department. And he walked past, She's just like, this generation, it's just very black and white. They have their little window, and if they don't know the answer, they move on instead of trying to be a problem solver, So it's a very interesting job market if someone would be wanting to leave and be young, So interested to hear what your thoughts and insights are on that, beyond the finance stuff. So
yeah, I think that there's a couple of things that come to mind. You can use, whether you've been a stay-at-home mom, whether you have gone through, maybe you have siblings and you've helped take care of the household. Those are skills that you have developed that can be translated and put into a resume. And I've actually spoken to someone, and I've got resources on my website. If you go to beyourmoneyhero.com, there are resources for that too, on how to put together a resume, how to translate that home economics type of skill set to a resume. And I think that a lot of times now, employers, because I work with a lot of business owners and I talk to a lot of employers, they are frustrated because it's hard to find someone who's willing to go the extra mile. And so I think that if you have somebody who has a little more flexibility, that they are willing to go the extra mile and just try, outside of just, that's not my department, sorry, that actually will give you a leg up. And you can communicate those things in a cover letter or going in and actually talking to somebody who's doing the hiring. But there's also a lot of other resources out there too, because there's certain fields that are they're in high demand that several states will actually cover tuition to pay for early childhood education, nursing, construction, forestry, and each state is a little bit different depending on what their needs are, but there are several programs where you can get additional formal education without a cost because they're looking for people to fill those positions.
That's fantastic advice, Stephanie. And I feel like we're at a place we can segue into lessons that you've learned along the way about personal finance. You've kind of already touched on that a little bit. And so one thing I definitely want us to touch on is the importance of saving for the future, having that emergency fund, working toward having some retirement money put away and that sort of thing. But I'm interested in hearing any other lessons you would want to include as well.
I think the biggest thing that makes me different is that I recognize how strongly our belief system about money affects the way that we actually handle our day-to-day money. So part of my story was when I moved out of my dad's house, I had $13,000 in cash. I was able to buy my first car in cash. I was able to get a good job. My partner and I were able to get into an apartment, and we were able to start building on that, which I'm very grateful for. But despite all of the knowledge that I had, I didn't always use it. So by 2015, we had to file bankruptcy. By 2016, I was basically homeless. I had my 2 kids and my job. My partner left me, and we moved in with some friends for a few months until I could get my feet back under me. And the reason why that happened was because I struggled with boundaries. I struggled with knowing my worth. I was walking on eggshells with my partner because there was conflict and abuse in my household. And so conflict felt dangerous to me. So I'd avoid it at all costs. It's something that even today, years and years and years later, I still have to have these mental conversations with myself to know that I am in a safe relationship and it's okay to use my voice because it's not dangerous. And just those small things can really affect the way we handle our money. So like my partner wouldn't hold down a stable job. He'd keep moving from one career to another, to another, to another, to another, to where he ended up basically volunteering at a bookstore that he was supposed to have some ownership in, but never ended up having ownership in. And so there were so many little decisions that I made along those years that caused us to just be completely financially devastated, to the point where I didn't have a car. We had to file bankruptcy and the car was taken. Through that bankruptcy, I walked out one day and it just wasn't there anymore. And the next morning I had to walk my kids 6 miles so I could get to my job so that I could try to pay these bills. I was getting payday loans just to try to cover rent up until that point, and I just couldn't do it anymore. And my partner, I would never tell them hey, I need you to actually hold down a job, or I need you to check the bank account before you go to the gas station and get a Gatorade and a candy bar and overdraw the account for 5 days. Those are some of the smaller things that we don't really think about the impact that they have on our finances, but over a period of time, it's got so much impact because we ultimately handle our money in a way that makes us feel safe. And so for some people, they find safety and money in, saving it up. Some people relinquish that control because of the conflict, and they don't feel they're afraid if they use their voice, then that's a threat to their safety. There are some people that find safety and money in trying to buy all of the things so they fit in. Maybe they have come out of the church, and maybe especially if you've grown up in it, you don't feel like you fit in with regular society. So you might buy fancier cars than you need, or bigger houses, or more expensive bags. And those are ways that they're trying to find safety and social acceptance. So there's so many different ways that we find safety in money, and that it can be detrimental. So recognizing what that relationship is and if it's serving you or if it's not. And really getting clear on what your values are. Because if I've seen this go several different ways. So you might value your health and your family, but you might be spending hundreds of dollars a month at DoorDash and Grubhub. And that spending might not be in alignment with what's actually important to you. But then I've seen other people kind of flip to the flip side of it. And I know I can tend to do this as well. Because I find safety in having cash, I can get so focused on saving every single penny that I'm not actually enjoying the experiences and I'm not being present. So there's a balance to those things, but knowing the way that you're wired is a great first step to start exploring that and pulling the judgment away from yourself and really thinking about what's important to you and why, and kind of starting to make a game plan on how to get there. Does that answer your question?
You covered a lot. I appreciate that. And I hear so much that you're saying that is really personal work, even much more so than just finance work. And I keep going back to this idea that I probably need some counseling. I've not ever had therapy, and I probably need therapy. I'm actually on a waiting list now. So, maybe eventually maybe that'll be season 2, Jennifer's journey through therapy, No, I'm just teasing. But yeah, there's a lot there to unpack. I noticed at the very beginning of the show that one thing you were talking about was, the way that your finances, the way that you use your finances sort of reveals a lot about your worldview or the kind of that maybe the hangups you have or things like that. And it reminded me of a book that we've talked about before on the show called The Body Keeps the Score. And that's another place that your health can actually reflect the trauma that you've been through or the issues, the disappointments, the things that you have had to navigate. So this is just one more aspect where there's a whole journey to keep moving forward through. And that's why we keep saying, life goes on and healing happens. You keep on moving forward. So, but thank you anyway for sharing all of that. One thing that we did want to talk about was about people in high control groups using money as a weapon. But before we get into that, Christy or Emily, did either one of you want to respond to what Stephanie just said?
I'll say something, Stephanie. I really appreciate when you speak about the impact that our life experiences have on how we spend money and how we relate to money. For those that are just leaving a high control group, what are some of the things that you would recommend for them to start noticing about themselves when it comes to money? Like, what are some of the things that you should tune into and key into to sort of start the process of healing and getting a grip on your finances?
I would say the first one is keep track of your spending. And an easy way to do that, is an app. You can use it like Rocket Money. They have a free version, but really keeping track of your spending, because then you can tune into how you're feeling about it. So for example, one of the red flags that I had was we bought a SUV that was way too expensive, but my ex wanted it. He said he was going to drive Lyft or something, and that never really happened. But every single time I made that car payment, I was so angry. And so when you have strong emotions, whether it's anger or guilt, any of those, or even you feel really good about it, because some people, they like to eat organic and they feel really good about the money that they spend on groceries. But those emotions are telling us something. And so instead of judging those emotions, ask what it's trying to tell you. Because if I had asked what that emotion was trying to tell me, I could have seen that anger was like telling me this is not what is important to you and you need to get rid of this car.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I think a lot of people struggle first when they start trying to address problems with their finances to actually figure out what the problem is. right? They like know there's too much money going out the door, but they think, what's too much? Like, what is a proper budget for our family for this and this? Because there is a huge range of what's normal and what's acceptable to spend on, say, groceries. So sitting down and figuring out what's important.
Yeah. And a lot of times, especially when things are stressful. So I work with a lot of people who are probably spending more than they even bring in, and they're kind of living that paycheck to paycheck, and it's very stressful. You can look at, you can contact me. I'm happy to help you kind of break all of that down into bite-sized pieces, because I've studied a lot about trauma. One of my favorite books is What Happened to You by Dr. Bruce Perry. And he has a wonderful analogy of how the brain is like this upside down triangle. And those upper parts of our brain, those control problem solving, creativity, some of those higher ways of thinking. But when we get stressed out, those parts of the brain start shutting down and we go into survival mode. And that bottom part of the triangle is our survival part of our brain. And so it's hard to get creative and think clearly. And when I'm overwhelmed, I want to just go lay down and take a nap. So sometimes when it's overwhelming to that point, you need to ask someone who is trusted to just sit with you sometimes and help you walk through those so that you can make small steps, because it can feel overwhelming and it doesn't need to be. You can start small.
Well, thank you.
Alrighty. So what about people in high demand groups using money as a weapon? I know you've touched a little bit on the group that you were in. Women were only allowed to work for their fathers or their husbands. That was not the case when I was growing up, and partly because you wouldn't survive. In my family, if my mom hadn't brought in money from somewhere else besides her husband or her dad, we would not have survived. If I had not brought in money besides what my dad had to offer me, we would not have survived. But so we did whatever we could to bring in as much money as we could so that we could all, get along a little bit better. But so what, in your experience, are there other ways you have seen people use money as a weapon in those high demand groups?
So I've talked to my sister a lot about this, because after I left, because I did have some of those financial resources, my dad got a lot more controlling with their money. And so it went into like a family account. He started putting all of it together so it wasn't separated. And when you do not have access to the money that you have earned and that is yours, that is financial abuse. And so that can be reported. And there's resources out there. And if someone needs help finding local resources, I'm always happy to help them find someone that they can reach out to. But that can be really tough, because if you are in a position where maybe, especially when there's kids involved, so if you're a parent and you want to leave because that's not a healthy situation, but you don't feel like you have the financial resources, it's rough. And there's places that can help you. So that's the first thing to know, is that there is help and there is support. And I'm always happy to help people get in touch with those resources as well. But it is illegal to keep funds from someone who has rightfully earned them. If someone is interfering with your ability to go to work just as a means of control, that's also not okay. That is also considered economic or financial abuse. And so there's a lot of different red flags that can pop up, and it's really important to get support in those areas by somebody who's trusted and has the means to help you.
Emily or Christy, do either of you have experience in this, or stories that you would want to share about times when people in the high demand group were using money as a weapon?
Well, I know a lot of married couples where the wife would work outside of the home, but her paycheck would be put into a family account, and then she did not have direct access to that family account. I think it's important for people to recognize that that is a form of financial abuse. If she can't get any of the money that she earned, then it's not okay. So I know of at least one woman where that was the case. She left and she didn't have a debit card. Her name was technically on the account. I guess she could have walked into the bank and asked for her money, but I doubt she had bank statements or anything to have an account number. So I'm not sure how that would have went down. So the other thing that I have heard often is women who leave high control groups, when they leave, they feel like they can't take their money. And I really don't know what to say to them in those instances, but I've heard several women who have left and have said, I'm not going to ask for anything in the divorce, or I don't want anything to come with me from our marriage when I leave. Can you speak a little bit to that? What might be going on with that financial decision they're making?
I mean, I can certainly relate to that because, like, even when I left my dad's house, I made sure I left everything that he could potentially claim that was his, because I didn't want him to take any legal recourse, because one of the ways that he used money as a intimidation more than control was, since he did have a lot of financial resources and he had political contacts and people in law enforcement, that was an intimidation factor for me, that if I stepped out of line in any way that he would come after me. And he did make threats to do that, but he never followed through because there was nothing that he could actually go on, right? And so sometimes it's helpful to talk to an attorney, especially if it's a situation where you're in a relationship with a partner, because each state has different laws. And I think that it comes from a place of you've reached this point where you want nothing else to do with them. And the emotional cost that you are going to pay trying to fight for what is rightfully yours, I think that that's what gets a lot of people hung up. So if there's not a whole lot there, maybe it's not worth it. But if there is something there, regardless, you should talk to a divorce attorney and just see what your options are. It's never going to hurt to just get the facts, and then you can make an informed decision whether or not it's worth it for you. Because so many, I mean, I've certainly felt it myself, where you've just reached this point where you just want to be done. You don't want anything from them. You never want to see them again. You just want to be done. And it can feel very overwhelming, but you might kick yourself for that later. So getting all of the information and talking to a professional that has, the legal qualifications to help you make that informed decision is probably the most important thing that you could do, because every situation is going to be a little bit different.
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie. One thing that went through my mind when we were talking about this, I think that some of this trying to make yourself smaller and less demanding is sort of ingrained in women in these high demand groups, because they are told to be submissive. They are socialized to put others' needs before their own. I remember when my next brother to me got married, and I went over to his home and talked to his wife, my sister-in-law, and she was talking about wanting to go to, I think, a consignment shop and get an outfit or something, but she was going to wait till she could clean some houses or do some babysitting so that she could bring the money in to do that. And I said, my brother is not going to care. He works and he expects you to spend the money. He married you so that he could provide for you. But she didn't see it that way at all. She felt like it was his money. And I think there's a lot there of sort of inferiority complexes and so forth, just from being told over and over, that you're less, and you're the helper, and you're not as good as, or as important as, or equal to your partner. And I would encourage women who are listening to this podcast, if you're in a marriage that's a healthy marriage and you want to keep it, I would encourage you to go ahead and move forward with growing with your partner into an even healthier relationship, where you ask for the things that you need, and you make suggestions about the way that you would spend your money and so forth. I think many of you are probably like me. You're married to understanding men who are willing to grow along with you, especially if they've also left the high demand group, because there is such a rich relationship to be had when you work together as partners and you make decisions as a team. And it can be fabulous and awesome. I can just say that as a person who will be married 29 years next month, and, let's see, 2012, what's 95 to 2012? It's less than 20 years. Is that right? I don't know. My math is not great. That's why we have Stephanie on here. So 17 years is what we had been married when we left the high demand group. There we go. Hey, I did it. I'm proud of me.
Good job.
All right. Emily, did you have anything that our conversation has sparked that you wanted to bring up?
Yeah, actually, back to topics, talking about the red flags and financial abuse. I think looking at the bigger picture too, I know there are high control churches that use that. And one instance in particular, thinking about finances and, how something positively or negatively affects you, I know there are high control groups that do not give giving statements to their parishioners. And so you're losing out on that financial tax benefit for charitable giving. They might not have an EIN number, they might not have proper registration. They're just taking in cash, pocketing it all. And then you have these pastors living in these fabulous mansions, getting brand new vehicles every 2 years. This is all stuff I've seen. In a normal modern church, there are things called budgets, and there are things called salaries, and there are things called the pastor doesn't pocket every single cent that comes in. So whether you have, 100,000 coming in for the year or 5 million, the pastor gets a set salary, and then the rest is used for other things within the church. And shocking, they actually have annual meetings. They supply spreadsheets, documentation. You can ask questions about it, all of these things. There's financial transparency. So I think a major red flag is when, we just don't talk about that, or why would, I forget what the exact meaning was, basically you're a greedy if you're actually thinking about why should you be getting a financial statement, just have faith and believe kind of deal. So that was when you were talking about the red flags, that kind of like, oh man, that was a total financial red flag right there.
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. One thought that I had too when we were talking about, doing money in a partnership when you are married or in a relationship with somebody, is one of the things that I've seen a lot of women do is let their partners handle all of the finances, but then if something happens, they find themselves in a really tough spot because they don't know what the bills are, they don't know where the accounts are, they don't have any of that information. And so I always encourage couples, like, even if, you've got one person who's just better at numbers, money's kind of their thing, they enjoy doing it, and then the other person just really doesn't like doing it, that is absolutely okay, but still have those discussions, because it brings up a lot of conversations on values and what's important, because I think of money kind of like the blood in our body. So when you're healthy, your blood's pumping all over to all of your body, taking oxygen and nutrients. But if there is a block in that blood flow, it can be fatal. The same is true if you're bleeding out, right? Like if there's too much coming out. And so there needs to be a healthy flow. And when you're talking to your partner and there's accountability on both sides and your values are being represented, it gives you the opportunity to have that healthy flow. You get to have conversations about giving and what places are important to you, but you also get to talk about the short term and long term, because so often we don't take into account the long term. And it's easy for emotions to take control because we love going out to eat or taking care of our friends or getting nice things for our kids. And so even if you're starting off small, starting to plan for the future, and again, like having somebody who will help you figure out how to do that in a wise way is great, because they can, it's easy to get wrapped up in the emotion of money because it can be so tied into our foundations of safety and security that it's sometimes hard to separate the emotion from it.
Yeah. When we first left the high control group, having conversations about money with my husband was uncomfortable. And I think that's really important for people to get through, because at this point we're, almost 10 years out of a high control group. It's not uncomfortable. It's just routine. Like, it just becomes this thing that you just do. We sit down once every couple of weeks and we go over what we spent and we go over what our plans are for the future. And it's just a thing. It doesn't have to be tied up and wrapped up in all of that sort of gender roles and baggage that we bring from a high control group. It really can become something where it's just part of what we do as partnership. But you have to start somewhere, and it's going to start feeling really uncomfortable.
Yeah, and it's okay if it feels a little uncomfortable. It's going to, absolutely. But it's going to get more and more comfortable, and it can actually become enjoyable. I have friends who will take like annual retreats for them and their partner to kind of go and talk about what they want to, like what their next year is going to look like. And they kind of do like this big annual review, and they make it a weekend getaway from the kids, and they turn it into something very enjoyable. So even if you have just like a little money date once a month, there's ways to make it more fun and more, look forward to it, actually.
So I'm curious, Stephanie, listening to all of this, I think the listeners might be interested. I've done a little bit of looking around on your social media and stuff. And so I think there's part of a story that's missing here on this podcast, how you went from having $13,000 to being bankrupt to now having a podcast and having a website and a book. So, we're used to people saying, here I am, I'm the big and glorious know-it-all. But how did you get there? What's your licensing? Besides the School of Hard Knocks, what have you come up to get where you're at now to be someone that has a voice that we actually should listen to?
And that's a great question. Thank you for asking that, Emily. So when I left the high control group, my partner and I had, got a job. We ended up getting married, had 2 kids, and then we lost everything. And before we lost the apartment, I was a mess. I had no food in the refrigerator. I took a picture of the refrigerator, and I show it in the courses because I work with families who are struggling with housing instability, and I show them the picture. And it's like, this is where I came from. I had a quarter-gallon maybe of milk, a bowl of some leftover peas, a couple of eggs, I think, and some condiments. Like, I really didn't have hardly anything. And I took a picture of it and I put it on Facebook where only I could see it. And I said, dear future self, how the heck did we make it out of this? And I promised myself that in that moment, when I figured out how I got to the other side, because I knew that would not be my story forever. I knew that there was more to life than just stressing out and living paycheck to paycheck. That was not the example I wanted to set for my kids. So I swore to myself, when I got to the other side, I would share with people what I did. And I've worked in tax resolution, so I'm enrolled with the IRS because I had worked in taxes and accounting. I have also gotten licensing for financial advising, so I carry several different licenses in various states for that, so that I can advise on life insurance and investments and things along that line. I've worked in nonprofits, and I have a variety of different things, and I've done a lot of studying, self-study on trauma, because nobody was talking about the effects that trauma has when you're dealing with money. And so the way that I got started on that path was, I got a divorce, And it was me and my girls for a while. I had gotten all of my debts paid off. I got to a point where I had a car that I had paid for in cash again, which felt great. And then my husband and I'd known him since my second daughter, because with my ex, I had 2 kiddos. And when my second daughter was a baby, that's when I had met Joe. So we were all friends at the same time. And so after we had gotten divorced, I got remarried. And I had known since I was probably 8 years old that I wanted to foster. But I didn't want to just foster, babies. I wanted to foster teenagers. So I've gone to a couple of the training meetings, and I told the facilitators, I was like, look, I got 3 little kids of my own. I'm not quite there yet, but what should I do to prepare myself? And they said, study trauma. And I was like, okay, got it. Study trauma. Because I'm a researcher. I love to learn, always learning new things. So mission assigned, got it. And that was when I started to study trauma that I was like, oh, that's why I did those things that I did, even though I knew better. That's why. And I didn't even know I was doing it. I was like, no, why is nobody talking about this? And so I was like, in 2020, I was working for a nonprofit running their accounting department. And even before COVID hit, there was all of this, everybody was against the other side, right? Because it was an election year and everybody's at each other's throats. And then COVID hit and I saw how hard it hit people. And I wanted to be able to do something a little more tangible. I love the accounting side. I love Excel. I love all the spreadsheets, but I wanted to be able to help in a more tangible way. So at that point, that was when I decided to go get licensed so that I could actually sit down and help people get tactical about what to do next.
Very good. Thank you.
That is such an awesome story.
I want people to not have to learn the hard way like I did. Sorry, go ahead, Christy.
Yeah, you have such a wide range of experience and and know-how, and I feel like you've kind of pigeonholed it into the perfect little pocket that encapsulates everything. So, yeah, it's very interesting. I'm excited to see where you take your podcast in the future because I think that you really are. I haven't really heard anything else about finances and trauma, albeit I haven't looked. But now it totally makes sense that would be deeply connected. It's deeply connected to everything else that you do moving forward once you've experienced something traumatic. So why wouldn't it be integral to how you deal with money?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's not something where you just shine the light on it and it disappears forever. This is something that I've been studying for years, and I work with other people, and I still will knock up against things that are holding me back, but I at least see it and I can address it and I can choose something different than what my pattern has been in the past. And the reason why I started the podcast was because I knew that I still had so much more that I wanted to learn and discover. But I wanted to invite other people to join me on those conversations, which is why I invite people to follow along.
Great. And tell us the name of your podcast again, in case someone didn't catch it.
It's Be Your Money Hero.
Okay. So Be Your Money Hero. That's the podcast to look for. And Stephanie Niblock. All right. So I think what we have not covered yet on what we had planned to cover are your top 5 pieces of advice for women either who are thinking about leaving a high demand group or they had already left and they're struggling. So how about if you give us one piece of advice and then one of us can reply, whoever it resonates with the most. And if 2 or 3 of us need to reply, that's fine too. But I think that'll take us up to the end of our podcast. So how about what is your top piece of advice, unless you'd rather go 5 to 1? It's up to you.
I think that I would have to say, find someone who can help support you, whether that's in accountability or whether it's actually talking to somebody, a coach or whoever that might be. Find somebody who can offer you support, because so often when we're in these big places of change in our life, it can be intimidating and a little scary. But if you have somebody with you who can help those shadows disappear, it'll help you actually stick to it and make more progress in less time.
Yeah, that would be like a spouse, or could that be a friend? What would you recommend there?
I think that it needs to be someone who you trust and respect. So that could be a partner, it could be a friend, it could be reaching out to somebody who is a financial advisor or a coach or a therapist, somebody who is going to help keep you accountable. And I'll throw this in here. One of the things that I have found to be very helpful, there's a book that Gretchen Rubin wrote. It's called The Four Tendencies. And the Four Tendencies talks about how we meet expectations. So it can be outer expectations like going to church. It could be meeting deadlines at work or school. Those are the other things that people expect you to do. Internal expectations are things like working out or eating well or being good with your money. Those are expectations that you have for yourself. And so there's a Four Tendencies quiz that you could take. I don't want to take up too much time. But if you search the Four Tendencies quiz on Google, it'll pull it up and it'll tell you what your tendency is, because then you'll know what to really focus on, because some people need an accountability person. That's going to be what's most motivating for them. Some people need like a rewards or consequences system where, if you don't meet that, my favorite one that I've heard is if you don't meet whatever expectation it is that you have for yourself, you donate $10 to your least favorite political candidate because they're rebels and they need some extra motivation. And I am personally a questioner. So that means that I need to be really dialed into why it's important. And that's what motivates me. So depending on where your motivation is, you can pick someone who's actually going to be able to help you. Because if you're an obliger, let's say, and you have a super sweet spouse, maybe being accountable to them isn't going to work, because they're not going to actually give you a hard time if you don't follow through. So you need somebody who's actually going to hold you accountable and make you, somebody that you trust and respect.
Well, thank you. That's good advice.
So what's your second piece of advice?
They're so important, but I would say start small, because when you're going through big changes, putting more on your plate can feel very overwhelming. So just start small. Starting small might be figuring out what it is that you want. Starting small, maybe just tracking your spending. Do something small and build on that.
And what's your third piece of advice?
So I think that my third piece of advice is really to these things. 3, 4, and 5 are so intertwined. I don't know how to separate them, but I would say really get clear on what it is that you value. And that will help guide you on where you want to go and help you start becoming more aware of your relationship, where you are in alignment with those values and maybe where you're not. That's
pretty interesting. It kind of ties back to something I was thinking about when you were talking about trauma, the trauma and finances tied together, and thinking just about in missions and community building overseas and stuff. So many times people think, well, if they're poor, that means there is a lack of money. But this all ties together, and it's the self-worth and the value and processing that trauma and all of that. So when you say, what do you value, I think that could actually be kind of a big step and a big journey to figure out what do you actually value, not what does the group value, what, helps you save face, or, what do you think others expect of you, but what do you actually as a person value, and what are your beliefs and understandings? How do you see yourself as a person? Do you see that you have value? The women in high control groups, you're no good, you're terrible, you're second rate, whatever, so I think that is a super deep point, and I thank you for that.
And I think a lot of times, the more I've been learning about women coming out of high control groups, we've heard of the trauma responses: fight, flight, freeze. But there is a fourth trauma response, and it's fawning, which I know is mine. That's my go-to. And fawning is where you make yourself most safe by being friends with people or getting close to the person who might hurt you, or people pleasing. And so for me, that people pleasing aspect of feeling uncomfortable, like if anything's uncomfortable or tense, that's my natural tendency, is to just go into people pleasing mode, because if somebody likes you, then they won't hurt you. And so it's being aware of all of those things and being clear on what your values are and why it's important will help pull you in the right direction to start getting a little bit more uncomfortable in safe situations. Like if you're in an abusive relationship, I'm not saying do this, like you need to get out of that abusive relationship first. That when you are safe, you can start to take smaller steps towards getting uncomfortable and actually practice using your voice, because that's confidence that you are going to gain as you start taking those small steps.
Yep, my response is definitely fawn as well. Like when I get into a moment of conflict, my tendency, my fawn probably looks a little bit different than just being friendly, but mine is to be agreeable. Like mine's to just be like, whatever you guys want to do. Like I just go completely neutral on things. And when we're talking about finances, you can't be neutral all the time on things. You have to be advocating for your vision for what your future is going to look like and for the things that are important to you, for you to accomplish and to have in life. So yeah, it's an ongoing process to not react that way all the time. But yes, when you're safe, it's easier to start practicing doing it. And over time, it gets easier.
So I would say number 4 is just, we've touched on it, being aware of what your relationship is, what your tendencies are, how you've been wired to react, and your understanding of just your relationship with money. So one of the things that you could pull up is the money scripts, and that's part of the way that we relate to money. So Emily, you actually touched on it towards the beginning of the podcast, where you could have money worship, where you think if you have enough money, you're going to be able to make all of your problems go away, or at least make them go away for now. You can have money status, which is where you think if you have enough money, or if you think you don't have any money, that makes you a better person, or it gives you more value as a human. You could have avoidance. And I see this a lot where money feels unsafe and someone has that flee response. Then they have a tendency to not look at the bank account. They don't ask about the money. They just avoid it altogether, because that's how they're finding their safety. And then for me, I happen to be like the penny pincher, and it's somebody who it's money vigilant, somebody who's like super couponer, hold on to those pennies so tight. Like that's my natural response. And again, it comes into the way that we find safety. That knowing the way that you're naturally wired will help you be aware and make better choices.
That's fantastic advice. Okay, so what's your final tip?
Final tip is know what you want. So many times in our money journey, we're just kind of going paycheck to paycheck or month to month, maybe year to year, but we're not really looking down the road at what we want long term. And if you don't know what you want, it's like saying that you want to take a vacation. Taking a vacation sounds great, but until you know if you want to take a luxury vacation to Paris or a road trip to Yellowstone, those are going to be 2 very different sets of directions. And so you've got to figure out where you want, because then you can start making a plan on how to get there.
Yes, and in that case, it also helps to know what your values are, so that when life throws you curveballs, for whatever reason, maybe the vacation you thought you wanted is suddenly triple the price, then you still can pick out a vacation that fits in your budget, because you know what you value, you know what you're looking for. You're looking for peace and quiet, or, maybe you're looking for adventure, or maybe you're looking for some kind of action, so as long as you know what you're looking for, you should be able to handle those curveballs, whatever they might be.
Yeah, and I think also being aware that as you go through the journey and you learn more about yourself, the further you get away from the high control group, you may discover things that actually then become something you want or value that you didn't realize before. Just thinking about when I moved overseas, my first budget, I had to reevaluate because I discovered all of a sudden I loved hosting people and hosting ministry groups and hosting Bible studies, and people eat and food costs money. And so in my second budget, I had to put in a hosting budget to kind of cover that. And so I had no idea when I was building the first budget that this was something I would need. So I think that's kind of fun. As you progress and learn about yourself, there can be changes, and I think this ties into the whole moving forward theme. Moving forward in our finances. Yes, we need to plan ahead. We need to know what we want. We need to prepare for the future, but also know that it's not a strict, tight. You're not on a tightrope. There's a big playground. Go out. Discover who you are, have fun in the playground, but yet you still have these smart boundaries, I would say, to keep yourself in check so you're not going into bankruptcy, or you're not sitting there, with tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars in your bank account, miserable as all get out, because you can't think about spending $5 for fun because, well, I might need that someday. What am I going to do? So yeah, balance.
All right. At this point in our show, I usually go around and ask everybody if they have any final thoughts they would like to share with the listeners before we sign off. So what about you, Stephanie? You have final thoughts?
Knowledge isn't necessarily power. It is the use of what you do with that knowledge that actually gives you the power. So just pick one small thing that you can take away from what you've heard today and actually go do it. You can set it on a calendar. You can put a reminder, but just use something small that you've learned here today and actually put that in action.
Thank you. Christy, you have any final thoughts?
I would just say that as women, we were taught that we should defer to other people on especially issues of money and finance. And I would empower anyone out there who's thinking, oh, how do I broach this conversation with my partner? How do I talk to my parents about this conversation? I would just empower them to do it. It was very hard when we first left a high control group for me to have that conversation with my husband, but it wasn't painful for him at all. He was excited to get the budget out and share it with me. And I think you'll find that anyone who's interested in having a true partnership with their significant other is going to relish the opportunity to share that with you. So ask your husband, ask your dad, ask whoever it is that you share finances with to have that conversation with you and to talk you through where you are and where you're going.
Yeah, and just kind of thinking about Stephanie's story as a whole, and then what I've seen of people who are thinking about leaving, who I've talked to that have left, even myself. I think so many times we look at things as so daunting and so terrifying, but I think Stephanie is a great testimony, and I found the photo of your refrigerator, things got really rough for you, but here you are. I think a lot of times, in especially high control groups, things are so black and white. Oh, if I leave, that's the end of it. No, just keep putting one foot in front of the other. Yeah, tough times can come, but really rarely, if you just kind of keep moving forward and doing what you can and learn and, question some of your beliefs and stuff, life's really not as big and scary as our brains tell us that it is. So I think get out there, one of your points, I forget which number, find those trusted friends to help you out. I think about a time I went and took a month long, when I was overseas, where Airbnb was only $10 a night, where Airbnb, before the American system made it what it is now, it was just couch surfing. $10 a night, spent a month on the beach, and people are like, oh, You're going to go on vacation for a whole month all by yourself? Oh, you're going to leave the high control group all by yourself? I'm sorry, but we're not living in a vacuum here in this world, and there are great people all around us, and people are always willing to come alongside others, and I made some great friends when I was on that beach, still connected with them today from around the world, and I was not bored, I was not alone, and we all left these high control groups, and we've had our struggles, we've had our triumphs, and here we are just, one day at a time, and having a chance to hopefully impact others in this world.
I love that, Emily. That's a great way to end out our show. And thank you so much, Stephanie, for coming. Be Your Money Hero. That's the podcast. That's the book. And with Stephanie Niblock. Did you want to say anything more, Stephanie, before we sign off?
Thank you for having me. This has been fun.
Indeed. We always have a great time. So thank you, listeners, for listening. We hope you found our show as informative and helpful as we did, because it was definitely a very informative show this week. Feel free to contact us at movingforwardtalkshow.com with any questions you may have or ideas for future shows. We look forward to hearing from you, and we want to continue to demonstrate that life goes on and healing happens as long as you keep moving forward.